Welcome to the Globe and Mail Leaders Debate on the Economy, and welcome to Calgary in the Palomino Room at the BMO Centre in Stampede Park for a very special and exciting debate, one that's focused on only one topic, the most important issue of election 2015, the economy. And there's no better place for this debate than where we are tonight in Alberta. Very rarely have federal leaders' election debates taken place outside of central Canada, but we felt it was important to hold our debate in this province, which has been the barometer for the country's economy. So, to help me set the scene for tonight's event, I'm joined by some familiar Globe and Mail faces. Paul Waldie is the editor of the Report on Business. Kelly Cryderman is one of our business reporters in Calgary. And Adam Radwanski is our national political columnist. So hello. And let's get started. And we're going to start with Adam. Adam, what are you expecting tonight, and what should we be watching for?
I think it's going to be a little different from what we've seen in leaders' debates past. I mean, usually the construct here is that we see the two or three or however many non-incumbents going hard at the incumbent. In this case, it's kind of a free-for-all in this campaign. I mean, you've got all parties polling in roughly the same areas, and I think you're going to see them really going hard at each other. I think you also have to hope, of course, that this being all on the economy instead of an array of topics, that hopefully they'll get a little past the talking points and actually have to really delve into the issues.
Yeah, 30-30-30 basically is what we're seeing in the polls, Paul. And so what are you expecting?
Well, I tell you what, Jane, I don't know about you, but I just hope this debate is a heck of a lot more interesting than the one we saw last time. That first debate in the first week of August, it was boring. None of the leaders impressed me at all. So I'll give them a free pass on that one because it was so early in the campaign. But I want to see some life and some fire this time around. And I want to see them address two key issues, Jane. I want to see them talk about unemployment and employment in this country. There's 1.3 million Canadians out of work, more than that actually. And a lot of people who are working in pretty unsatisfactory jobs. Wage rates haven't kept up with inflation for many, many years. So I want to see what they have to say about that. The second thing I want to hear some serious answers on is household debt. Canadians owe something like $1.8 trillion. It's higher than ever. It's going up at a rapid rate. That affects house prices. That affects consumer spending. That affects so many parts of our economy. So I want to see if they have any answers to that.
Okay, and Kelly, you live here in Alberta. You live here in Calgary. You see what the situation is. What are you expecting Albertans to hear? What do you think Albertans hope to hear from the three leaders tonight?
Well, I think when you're talking about economic uncertainty, Calgary is a good starting point. We're seeing a lot of sleepless nights from a lot of people, a lot of job losses, and people are expecting more as oil stays lower for longer, as the parlance right now. You're seeing people worried about their mortgages, worried about their debt. Albertans are some of the most indebted people in Canada. So I think people are going to be looking for policies that speak to them. All economics really for elections, what matters is personal, and I think they're going to be looking for some kind of reassurance.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what we've heard from the leaders so far, and we'll talk about the budget issue and balanced budgets. Adam, Conservative leader Stephen Harper and Thomas Mulcair, the NDP leader, have talked about balancing budgets. What do you think about that? Realistic plans? Where are you on that?
Well, I don't think it's a great surprise that Mr. Harper's talking about that. I mean, he's been building to this for 4 years. We all knew he was going to run on a balanced budget now, and he wasn't going to be swayed from that. I don't think he's that vulnerable on that. I mean, I know the other leaders have occasionally tried to poke a hole in that, but realistically, I don't think people seriously doubt that he's committed to that, or at least the most committed of these three leaders. Nobody's really going to question that. What's interesting, of course, is Mr. Mulcair's position, which goes so much against type with the NDP, goes against what the Liberals are running on, is clearly an attempt to assure people that it's not the same old NDP. But I do think you're going to see more attempts to question that. I mean, the NDP put out a costing document of sorts this week. I think the general consensus was, not exactly the most complete thing. Now, in fairness, there may be more to come. But I do think you're going to see questioning of that, and whether that means that, as the Liberals have suggested, that they really have they're really committed to austerity, which one wonders about, or whether it means that, in fact, they would want to bring a deficit. Either way, I think you're going to see Mr. Mulcair somewhat pressed to explain how that's actually possible.
What do you think, Paul, about this balanced budget issue?
I don't care about deficits. I care about the fundamental restructuring that our economy is going through. I don't think any of these leaders have got their heads around yet. This economy is very different than it was a year ago or even 6 months ago. We've got oil under $50 a barrel. It's probably going to stay under $50 a barrel, maybe for 5, 10, 15 years. That's a real change in the way Canada is structured. And I think They have to figure that out. That affects already manufacturing jobs. Our dollar is low. That's supposed to help our exports. It's not helping our exports because everybody else's currency is low. We're losing market share in the U.S. to Mexico. It's not the same economy that it was, and I'm not hearing anything from these three leaders yet. I'm hoping tonight I will. That's going to explain how they're going to address that.
Okay, so Paul might not care about deficits, but I think a lot of people care about deficits, and Mr. Trudeau seems to care about deficits. And Adam, Mr. Trudeau's plan is to run,
he loves them.
Or just doesn't care about them either.
He loves modest ones. To run 3 small deficits, to be able to invest in infrastructure to stimulate the economy. What do you think of that plan?
I think obviously it's an attempt at a point of differentiation. I think it came as a surprise. It did somewhat, although somewhat in keeping with the way that he'd been running before that in terms of talking about wanting to invest more, it did seem to contradict some of the things he'd said before. So I don't think it was a long-term, a long plan to say that. I don't think it's hurt him necessarily. I don't think, we've seen some polling data that suggests that a lot of people are okay with the idea of some deficits.
But they're not okay, the data that we saw today, in fact, in the Globe and Mail, talks about the fact they're not okay with Mr. Trudeau running that plan. They're okay with their plan, but not the person who's running it.
Right, and I think it's also a fair question of, okay, so is this, is it really only 3 years, really only 4 years, or as I think Mr. Harper in particular is going to suggest, is it a lot more than that? Does he really have a plan to get out of it? And I think what Mr. Mulcair is going to try to push, more than just talking about the evils of deficits, is, well, you just came to this, along with a bunch of other issues, he'll also try to do the same thing on, which he's been doing a lot on the campaign trail recently. I think you'll see Mr. Mulcair really going at perceived inconsistency and basically saying you can't trust this guy because he just suddenly decided he wants to run large deficits, which seem to come a bit out of nowhere.
Yeah,
but as the economy seems to worsen, I've heard some people say Mr. Trudeau is being the most honest about the country's finances. The OECD is predicting our growth will slow down next year. Obviously, the price of oil is still weighing on the federal government's finances, and some people are saying maybe he's just being the most realistic about what's going to happen.
Well, he hasn't been the most clear, right? Honest or realistic, whatever. He hasn't been very clear. I haven't heard a lot of details from those guys. The NDP's put out something of an economic plan, 7 pages, not a lot, but at least there's something there. The government has its plan, has what they've done in the past few years, but I've seen very little from Trudeau and the Liberals, and I'm hoping to hear some more tonight, a little bit more detail on what exactly they plan for this thing. So far, it's been pretty empty.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the issues that David Wamsley is going to be asking the leaders tonight. And one of the issues is about energy and the environment. And Kelly, you're in a good place to talk about that and to talk about, what you expect the leaders to say about that, especially on the pipeline issue.
Well, I think, we know that Mr. Harper has been generally pro-pipeline, I think, and he's received criticism from the other leaders for that. And we see Mr. Trudeau trying to walk a delicate balance between the environment and the economy. And even in the last debate, he did, it seemed, make the attempt to speak to Albertans and say that, part of the reason that you're not able to export your oil is because Canada's reputation has been damaged. And I don't know if that argument will play, that people really believe Canada has the control over, Keystone XL or the ability of other countries to approve pipelines or not. So Mr. Mulcair has been, he approves of some pipelines and doesn't approve of others.
So. And, getting back to the price of oil, there's lots of folks who say, do we really need any of these pipelines if oil's going to stay under $50 a barrel? And I think those are the questions people in the U.S. are starting to ask about Keystone. And along with the environmental issues, there's economic issues here. Why bother if we're not going to have oil, if we're going to have oil sitting at $45 or even lower in the years to come?
Yeah, Adam?
And one of the particularly tricky aspects here, there will be other debates that are in French primarily, but one that really matters in terms of Quebec is the Energy East pipeline.
Exactly.
And that's one where Mr. Mulcair in particular has been trying to walk a very difficult balance in that, the one issue that the Bloc Québécois thinks it can make hay over, one of the very few, is that the NDP is not sufficiently opposed to a pipeline that would go through Quebec, relative to being opposed to other pipelines.
Of course, Energy East is going through Quebec to New Brunswick.
To New Brunswick, that's right. So that's a potential vulnerability for him there. So he has indicated sort of being opposed to it, but not completely opposed to it, which the danger there is always that you kind of get the worst of both worlds from his perspective, and you wind up not being firm enough in Quebec, although it doesn't seem to have hurt him yet. And also concerning people in this part of the country who would say, well, why is he opposed to every pipeline?
And the one thing, and I know lots of folks out here in this audience would argue this, that the one thing about pipelines, and that's part of this debate, is all right, you don't build the pipelines, what do? You put that oil on trains, and how's that worked out for us, right?
But I think the big question is whether that's even an issue right now in this era of oil being under $50 a barrel, whether, you're seeing even the shipping on trains going down. And, I think the big question is for the leaders is how they address the energy economy and whether, you know, they give any hope to people whose jobs are reliant on the energy sector.
Okay, that brings us to jobs, and that's another big topic and big focus of our evening tonight. Paul, on jobs.
Well, you know, I just think the job market has changed so much, certainly from when I was a kid, and I know you're a lot younger than me, Jane, but you know, part-time work then was much different. You know, you were guaranteed hours, you kind of were guaranteed a wage, you kind of knew what you were doing. Now, the part-time world is so different. You've got these zero-hour things where people sit at home waiting to be called. You've got companies who now treat employees in the same way they treat supplies, just-in-time delivery, right? I'm only going to phone up Susie for work a minute before the shift because I know I'm going to need her, but I might not phone her, right? I think the nature of work has changed. I think wages haven't came up, as I've said before. And I think, once again, this is all part of this shift in the economy that I don't think the political parties have cottoned onto just yet.
Right, and one issue that we wanted to talk about was immigration, and that's something that David's going to be asking the leaders about too. So, Adam, on immigration.
Yeah, it's flown a little under the radar in this campaign, other than, of course, we've heard a lot about the refugee crisis, which is not really an economic issue. I don't think it's going to be, unless they decide to bring it up, I don't think it's going to be a big focus tonight. But I do think on immigration, in terms of the difference between economic migration and the more sort of traditional family reunification that we've also done in this country, both of the opposition parties have kind of quietly been trying to play that up in a lot of suburban areas where there's very large immigrant populations. People want to be able to, say, get their parents here. It's a little harder than it used to be because the priority is on economic migrants instead. I expect that we may see, although maybe they prefer to do it more quietly, but we may see Mr. Trudeau or Mr. Mulcair try to bring that up a little bit, as in there needs to be a better balance of that.
And I think, you know, I think they might talk about the foreign worker program too, which has gotten a lot of attention for sort of the fast food places and that. But there's a lot of farmers out there who rely on foreign workers who can't get them now. There's a lot of small businesses out there, manufacturers who relied on foreign workers. They can't get them now, and that's a big issue.
Very controversial topic, so hopefully that will come out tonight. Now, I'm going to ask you guys about who has the most to lose. Quickly, Paul.
Well, in my mind, Trudeau has the most to lose.
Yeah.
I thought he was terrible in the first debate. I don't care what the pundits say. I thought he looked like a high school kid. I think he has the most to lose if he comes in and pulling that off again. However, I also think he has the most to gain if he can at least show he's got a credible position. He knows his facts and figures about the economy. I think there's more upside for him just because, in my mind, he's starting from a negative base. However, though, I also think Harper has a lot to lose as well. This is his town. This is his debate. These are his issues. If he can't come out of this as a clear winner, then he's got a problem on his hands.
Okay, so don't sit on the fence like Paul. Kelly, could you tell us who you think who has the most to lose?
Yeah, I think that Harper has the most to lose if he doesn't have a stellar performance. Anything less than a stellar performance will be deemed a disappointment, I think. Expectations for Justin Trudeau will be higher this time. And Mr. Mulcair is going to have to explain his fiscal policy, and I think the other leaders are going to ask for more details. So if he's not able to shore up those details, it's going to be a problem for him.
Okay, Adam.
Yeah, I disagree with Paul that Mr. Trudeau was terrible last time. I thought he was on balance fairly good. But I
Watching
agree.
the same debate,
well, but maybe the lower expectations
Adam,
worked on
Canada,
me.
you gotta love it. You like lines like
Adam wrote about that
goodness.
today too,
Well, that's
about
right.
how the bar was so
The bar was
low.
low.
The expectations
The bar
were
was
so
definitely
low for Mr.
low.
Trudeau. Yeah.
And I think, look, I think I agree. I was going to say I disagree that he was terrible. I agree that I think he has the most to lose because I think the expectations are higher right now, and I think you've got the other parties have a real incentive to go very hard at him. The other leaders do, because the Liberals have moved up to a point which neither other party can be very comfortable with. Where they're kind of hovering around 30% support in the national polls, and I think they're going to try to goad Mr. Trudeau into. You know, it's not necessarily about having him on the defensive for an hour and a half. I mean, I hope that every voter in the country watches tonight. Some of them will not watch it live. Hopefully very few. And what you have to do if you're the other leaders is try to create a clip, even if it's only a few seconds. And they all have to be a little careful with this because you can be defined by a few bad seconds. And Mr. Trudeau is maybe a little more susceptible to that, as we've seen on the campaign until now, in terms of just a quick offhand comment that can wind up actually defining his performance.
Okay, 10 seconds each. Who's going to ace the debate?
Well, Harper has to ace it, or it's terrible for him.
Okay, Kelly?
Justin Trudeau has to prove that the differentiation strategy is going to work for his
So
party.
he has to ace the debate. Justin Trudeau, you're saying?
Harper has to.
Harper, and you're saying?
Mr. Trudeau has to, I think, at least do well, and he could win by not losing. But I think Mr. Mulcair will actually perform well. I have a feeling that last time he had trouble getting just the right tone. I think they probably adjusted that.
He just has to hold his own, and he
Who,
comes out here
Mr.
fine.
Mulcair just has to hold his own?
No, I think
he has to win.
Expectations are low. The NDP can't run the economy, so if he comes out of here showing that he can at least has his head around the economy, he's fine.
They released a fiscal plan yesterday. Mr. Mulcair has to provide more details.
Okay, that's it, guys. I want to thank you very much.